Katherine Montgomery, a 49-year-old Houston socialite, had orchestrated her life with the precision of a master conductor. A $75 million fortune, a mansion in River Oaks, and a carefully curated public image built over decades. But when her obsession with an 18-year-old lifeguard threatened to expose the dark reality behind her philanthropic facade, the marble floors of her mansion would witness a confrontation that would shatter Houston's elite society forever. Detective Maria Ramirez stood in the grand foyer of 3712, Willowick Road, her experienced eyes taking in the scene before her. The June morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating what had once been a showcase of wealth and refinement, now transformed into a tableau of violence. Katherine Montgomery's body lay crumpled near the imported marble fireplace, her designer silk robe stained dark red, her perfectly maintained blonde hair matted with blood. As crime scene technicians worked methodically around her, Ramirez reviewed the security footage from the previous night. The massive screen in Katherine's home office displayed multiple camera views, each capturing moments from the fatal evening. Katherine, wearing Valentino, pacing the formal living room. A young man, Jake Turner, barely 18, entering through the front door, his reluctance visible in every movement. Their confrontation escalating from quiet tension to explosive violence. With growing unease, Ramirez opened the files on Katherine's laptop, discovered open on her desk. Folders upon folders revealed an obsession that bordered on madness: surveillance reports, financial records, daily schedules, all centered around Jake. In the adjacent room, she could hear the whispers of forensics officers documenting the evidence of Katherine's final moments. The detective's hand paused over a small moleskin notebook, its pages filled with Katherine's elegant handwriting detailing every aspect of Jake's life. A diary of control that would expose the dark underbelly of River Oaks society. In the master bedroom upstairs, untouched by the chaos below, a half-empty glass of wine sat on the nightstand beside a framed photo from a recent charity gala. In it, Katherine smiled brilliantly at the camera, one manicured hand possessively gripping the arm of a handsome young man who looked too young to be at such an event. The image captured perfectly the facade that had just crumbled, leaving behind questions that would shock Houston's most exclusive neighborhood to its core. Katherine Montgomery's ascent from middle-class Fort Worth to the pinnacle of Houston society was a masterpiece of ambition and calculation. Born Katherine Ann Mitchell in 1973, she grew up in a modest ranch-style house where her father taught high school physics and her mother worked as a dental hygienist. The young Katherine showed an early appetite for more, carefully cultivating relationships with her wealthy classmates and organizing charity events that caught the attention of Fort Worth's elite families. At Texas Christian University, Katherine distinguished herself not through academics but through an uncanny ability to navigate social hierarchies. She joined the right sorority, attended the right parties, and most importantly, met the right people. It was at a charity gala in 1995 that she first caught the eye of Robert Montgomery, a rising star in Houston's energy sector 15 years her senior. Robert saw in Katherine what he needed: youth, beauty, and most importantly, a keen understanding of social dynamics that would prove invaluable in his ascent through Houston's corporate world. Their courtship was brief but calculated. Within 6 months, Katherine had secured both a diamond ring and Robert's promise to establish her on Houston's charity circuit. Their wedding at St. John the Divine Episcopal Church made the society pages of both the Houston Chronicle and Texas Monthly. Katherine, wearing a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, looked every inch the oil heiress she would become. The guest list read like a who's who of Texas energy executives, each gift more extravagant than the last. But it was Katherine's toast at the reception that truly announced her arrival. A perfectly crafted speech that managed to charm the old guard while subtly declaring her intentions to remake Houston society in her own image. The first decade of their marriage saw Katherine orchestrating Robert's social rise with precision. Her dinner parties became legendary, mixing old money with emerging tech entrepreneurs and international energy traders. She mastered the art of the strategic invitation, the perfectly timed charity donation, the whispered conversation that could make or break reputations. By 2019, Katherine had positioned herself at the very center of Houston's elite social circle. Her annual Green Energy Future Gala became a must-attend event, carefully balancing environmental messaging with the realities of Houston's oil-based economy. Her name appeared on the boards of the city's most prestigious cultural institutions, and her approval could make or break any charitable endeavor. When COVID-19 hit in early 2020, Katherine initially saw it as merely another challenge to master. She quickly adapted, organizing virtual charity auctions and exclusive small gatherings that skirted the edges of lockdown restrictions. But as the pandemic dragged on, the strain began to show. Robert, already dealing with undisclosed health issues, became increasingly reclusive. The last time Robert left their River Oaks mansion was September 15, 2020, helped into an ambulance by paramedics. Katherine, perfectly composed in Chanel loungewear, followed in her Mercedes G-Wagon. 3 weeks later, Robert Montgomery succumbed to COVID-19 complications at Houston Methodist Hospital. Katherine retreated from public view for exactly 1 month, a calculated period of mourning. When she re-emerged, it was with a stunning feature in Vogue magazine on resilience in the age of COVID. The article painted her as the perfect grieving widow, stepping up to manage both Robert's business interests and their charitable foundation. What the article didn't mention was the vicious inheritance battle brewing behind the scenes. Robert's children from his first marriage, both older than Katherine, contested the will that left her in control of the Montgomery fortune. The ensuing legal battle exposed ugly family rifts, with accusations of manipulation and elder abuse flying between both sides. Katherine fought back with characteristic precision. Her lawyers strategically leaked information about her stepchildren's past financial mismanagement and their apparent absence during their father's final days. By early 2021, she had secured her position, emerging with control of $75 million in assets and the Montgomery name. The River Oaks mansion, already impressive, underwent a complete renovation in the spring of 2021. Each room was redesigned to showcase her victory and wealth. The Great Room, where she would ultimately meet her end, was featured in Architectural Digest, its limestone fireplace and crystal chandeliers serving as the backdrop for her carefully crafted new image as a philanthropic powerhouse. But the palace was empty. Her household staff noted her increasingly erratic behavior, pacing the marble halls late at night, wine glass in hand, making countless changes to party seating arrangements, obsessing over guest lists. Her inner circle had shrunk, with many friends from her married years quietly distancing themselves. Her stepchildren's absence from her life became conspicuous. At the 2021 Montgomery Foundation Christmas Gala, their empty seats at the family table sparked gossip that rippled through Houston society. Katherine compensated by throwing herself into new projects, each more lavish than the last. Her charitable donations increased, but so did her demands for recognition and control. The cracks in her facade began to show in early 2022. Those who knew Katherine best noticed subtle changes. Her legendary self-control occasionally slipped, particularly when dealing with younger, attractive service staff. Her personal trainer noted how she had suddenly doubled her sessions, obsessing over maintaining her youthful appearance. Her plastic surgeon recorded increased requests for anti-aging treatments. It was at River Oaks Country Club where Katherine began spending more and more time, particularly by the pool. Staff members noted her increased presence, always impeccably dressed in designer swimwear and resort wear, her eyes hidden behind large Chanel sunglasses. She began taking a particular interest in the club's younger employees, especially the newly hired summer staff. In May 2022, Katherine first encountered Jake Turner at the club's pool. The young lifeguard, barely 18 and fresh out of high school, caught her attention while helping her with her lounge chair. Their brief interaction, his natural charm meeting her practiced sophistication, would set in motion the events leading to her violent end. The day before her death, Katherine hosted what would be her final dinner party. Guests later recalled her seeming distracted, her usual perfect timing slightly off. She drank more than usual, and near the end of the evening, one guest overheard her making a phone call in her study, her voice alternating between sweet persuasion and barely contained fury. Less than 24 hours later, she would be found dead on her imported marble floor, her perfectly crafted world shattered beyond repair. Jake Turner's world existed in stark contrast to the opulent excess of River Oaks. In the pre-dawn hours of each morning, he would wake to the sound of his mother's aging Toyota Corolla starting up for her early shift at Memorial Hermann Hospital, where she worked as a unit secretary. Their small apartment in Spring Branch, a working-class neighborhood that felt light years away from Katherine Montgomery's mansion, held the dreams and struggles of a family trying to stay afloat in Houston's increasingly expensive landscape. At 18, Jake possessed the kind of natural good looks that turned heads, tall and athletic, with an easy smile that masked the weight of responsibilities he carried. His high school graduation photo, proudly displayed on their living room wall, showed him in a borrowed suit, his diploma held high. The image captured both his potential and the reality of his circumstances. He was voted most likely to succeed by his classmates, but his family's financial situation meant that success would have to wait. The Turner family's struggles had deepened during the pandemic. Jake's father, a construction foreman, had been laid off in 2020 and subsequently picked up sporadic work through temporary agencies, each job paying less than the last. Medical bills from his mother's bout with COVID had further strained their resources. Jake's younger sister, Emma, was starting high school with dreams of becoming a doctor, adding another layer of financial pressure to the family's future. It was Jake's high school counselor who suggested he apply for the summer staff position at River Oaks Country Club. The pay was better than most entry-level jobs, and tips from wealthy members could be substantial. More importantly, the position came with the possibility of a scholarship program for employees pursuing higher education. For Jake, who had earned a 3.8 GPA despite working part-time throughout high school, it represented a chance to begin climbing out of the economic hole his family found themselves in. His first day at the club in May 2022 was an education in itself. The locker room orientation included detailed instructions on how to address members, proper posture while on duty, and the importance of being seen but not heard. Jake learned quickly that his role as a lifeguard meant more than watching the pool. It meant being a silent observer to the lives of Houston's elite. The regular members barely noticed him, their eyes sliding past as if he were part of the carefully maintained landscape. He spent his mornings checking chlorine levels and skimming leaves from the Olympic-sized pool, afternoons watching over swimming lessons for children who wore designer swimwear that cost more than his monthly salary, and evenings cleaning up after guests who never bothered to pick up their own towels. Jake's fellow staff members warned him about certain members, the ones who complained constantly, who never tipped, who treated the staff like personal servants. But no one warned him about Katherine Montgomery. No one thought to tell the new lifeguard about the widow who had recently begun spending her afternoons by the pool, her designer sunglasses hiding calculating eyes that assessed each young male staff member like items at an auction. Their first encounter came during his third week on the job. Katherine had arrived later than usual, close to sunset when most members had already left. Jake was adjusting the umbrellas, preparing to close the pool area, when she called him over to help with her lounge chair. Her voice carried that particular tone of casual command that he had come to associate with the wealthy, expecting immediate compliance while maintaining a facade of politeness. "You're new here," she observed, her eyes taking in his standard-issue uniform polo and red shorts. "Jake, isn't it?" The fact that she knew his name surprised him. Most members didn't bother reading staff name tags. "Yes, he replied, automatically falling into the deferential tone required by club policy. "Started a few weeks ago. Please, call me Katherine," she smiled, removing her sunglasses. "Mrs. Montgomery makes me feel ancient." Her laugh was practiced but effective, putting him at ease despite himself. "You look familiar. Did you attend St. John's?" "No, Katherine," he corrected himself. "Spring Branch High. Just graduated." "Ah," she nodded, her interest visibly increasing. "Plans for college?" The question led to a conversation that lasted well past the pool's closing time. Jake found himself opening up about his dreams of attending the University of Houston's business school, his family's financial struggles, his determination to create a better future. Katherine listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and offering occasional insights about the business world. As he helped her gather her belongings, Katherine mentioned the Montgomery Foundation's scholarship program. "We're always looking to support promising young people," she said, her hand lingering on his arm as she wrote down her private number. "Send me your transcript. Perhaps we can help." That evening, Jake returned home filled with cautious hope. He showed the foundation's website to his parents, who expressed mixed feelings about accepting help from a wealthy stranger. His father, particularly, seemed suspicious of Katherine's motives. "Nothing comes free in this world, son," he warned, but didn't forbid Jake from pursuing the opportunity. Over the next week, Katherine's visits to the pool became more frequent and predictable. She always arrived during Jake's shifts, always chose a lounge chair in his section. Their conversations continued, each one longer than the last. She began bringing him books about business and finance, suggesting he could borrow them if interested. Her advice seemed genuine, her interest in his future apparently sincere. What Jake couldn't see, what his youth and optimism blinded him to, were the subtle shifts in Katherine's behavior. The way she positioned herself to display her still athletic figure to best advantage. How her sundresses became slightly shorter, her swimwear more revealing. The calculated touches that seemed casual but were anything but. Their dynamic shifted definitively one evening in late May. Katherine had lingered until closing again, and as Jake prepared to leave, she offered him a ride home. "It's silly for you to wait for the bus in this heat," she insisted. Her Mercedes G-Wagon smelled of expensive leather and her signature perfume. During the drive, she spoke of an upcoming charity gala, mentioning casually that she needed a young escort to help manage the event. "The foundation pays quite well for this kind of work," she added, watching his reaction from the corner of her eye. "And it would be excellent networking experience for an aspiring business student." Jake, sitting in a car that cost more than his family's annual income, found himself saying yes before fully considering the implications. Katherine's smile in response held a hint of triumph that he would only recognize in hindsight. That night, alone in his small bedroom, Jake allowed himself to dream. The scholarship possibility, the networking opportunities, the chance to learn from someone who had mastered the business world. It all seemed too good to be true. His phone buzzed with a text from Katherine, confirming the details for the gala and arranging for him to be fitted for a proper tuxedo. What Jake couldn't know, was that he had just taken the first step down a path that would lead to tragedy. Katherine Montgomery had selected her next project, and like everything in her carefully curated world, this relationship would be orchestrated entirely on her terms. In the coming weeks, Jake would learn the price of Katherine's patronage. The expectations would grow, the boundaries would blur, and the line between opportunity and exploitation would become increasingly difficult to discern. But for now, he was simply a young man on the cusp of what seemed like a life-changing opportunity, unaware that he had caught the eye of a predator dressed in Chanel and diamonds. The transformation of Jake Turner began with a Black American Express card. Katherine presented it to him over dinner at Tony's, sliding it across the white tablecloth with the practiced casualness of someone accustomed to buying loyalty. "For expenses," she explained, watching his reaction carefully. "The Foundation's scholarship program includes a stipend for educational materials and appropriate attire." The lie was smooth, rehearsed. Jake, still wearing the suit Katherine had bought him for the charity gala, felt the weight of the card in his hands. Not just plastic, but possibility. Within weeks, Katherine had orchestrated a complete makeover of Jake's life. His wardrobe, once consisting of discount store basics, was replaced by designer labels carefully selected under Katherine's supervision. Tom Ford suits, Gucci loafers, Rolex watch, each item chosen to reflect not just wealth, but Katherine's specific taste. She was creating a companion worthy of being seen at her side. The private apartment came next, a luxury one-bedroom in a discreet building owned by one of Katherine's real estate shell companies. "You need a proper place to study," she insisted, dismissing his protests about the cost. The apartment was both gift and golden cage, its rent an invisible chain binding him to Katherine's generosity. Jake's parents were told a carefully constructed story about a prestigious internship with the Montgomery Foundation, complete with housing allowance and educational benefits. Katherine had even arranged for official-looking documentation to support the lie. His mother, though initially skeptical, was won over by the prospect of her son's apparent good fortune. His father's doubts were silenced by the first deposit into Jake's newly established scholarship account. The arrangement's true nature revealed itself gradually. First came the expectations. Katherine needed a companion for various social events, charity functions, private dinners. Jake learned to play his part, the charming protégé, the grateful scholarship recipient, the attentive escort. He mastered the art of deflecting questions about his relationship with Katherine, repeating the carefully scripted responses she had prepared. But Katherine's control extended far beyond public appearances. She began monitoring his movements through the security system in his apartment building, noting his comings and goings. His phone, a new iPhone Katherine insisted he needed for business purposes, came with tracking features enabled. She would casually mention details about his daily routine that she couldn't have known without surveillance. The financial control tightened like a velvet noose. Katherine managed every aspect of Jake's expenses, from his grocery deliveries to his gym membership. The black Amex statements went directly to her office. Each purchase was scrutinized, each deviation from her approved spending patterns questioned. The generous monthly allowance she provided came with increasingly explicit expectations about his availability and loyalty. "I'm investing in your future," became Katherine's frequent refrain, a reminder of his dependence wrapped in the language of mentorship. She had arranged for his enrollment at the University of Houston's business school for the fall semester, paying the tuition directly. His class schedule was carefully selected to ensure maximum availability during her preferred hours. The isolation happened so gradually that Jake barely noticed it happening. Katherine's demands on his time made maintaining old friendships difficult. His high school friends' texts went unanswered as Katherine kept him busy with endless social obligations. Family dinners were missed due to last-minute foundation events that couldn't be rescheduled. By midsummer, Jake's world had shrunk to the narrow confines of Katherine's influence. His daily routine was a carefully choreographed dance of obligations and appearances. Mornings at the country club, Katherine had insisted he keep the lifeguard job for appearances' sake, followed by afternoons spent running her errands or accompanying her to social functions. Evenings were often spent at her mansion or at exclusive restaurants where Katherine would hold court while keeping Jake close at hand. The physical aspect of their relationship evolved with the same calculated precision. Katherine was expert at creating situations that blurred professional and personal boundaries. Late nights reviewing foundation documents in her study, champagne-fueled charity planning sessions, private poolside meetings at her mansion. Each encounter pushed the boundaries further, until the line between mentorship and intimacy disappeared entirely. Jake's resistance eroded under the constant pressure of Katherine's attention and demands. Any attempt to establish boundaries was met with subtle reminders of his dependence. "Of course you don't have to attend tonight's gala," she would say, while fingering the keys to his apartment or glancing meaningfully at his university enrollment papers. The threats were never explicit, but always clear. Katherine's jealousy emerged as her control deepened. She questioned him about female students at the country club, about old high school friends who might message him. Her tone remained light, but her eyes held a warning. The luxury gifts increased after any interaction she perceived as threatening to her control. A new watch after he spent too long chatting with a tennis instructor. A designer wardrobe update following a friendly conversation with a club member's daughter. The surveillance became more overt. Katherine would surprise him at locations she couldn't have known about without tracking him. She began requiring him to share his class schedule, his planned study groups, his workout times at the gym. The black Amex card became a monitoring tool, every purchase logged, every location noted, every deviation questioned. His apartment, once a symbol of independence, became another mechanism of control. Katherine would appear unannounced, using her owner's access key, often late at night. She rearranged his belongings, replaced his furniture with pieces she preferred, filled his closet with clothes she had selected. The space, like Jake himself, became an extension of Katherine's carefully curated world. The emotional manipulation was perhaps the most insidious aspect of Katherine's control. She alternated between lavish affection and cold withdrawal, keeping Jake off balance and increasingly dependent on her approval. She would praise his potential while subtly undermining his confidence, creating a dynamic where her validation became essential to his sense of worth. "You're different from the others," she would tell him during intimate moments, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "You understand me. You understand this world." The words were both praise and warning, a reminder that he was chosen, special, but also replaceable if he failed to meet her expectations. By August, Jake's transformation was complete on the surface. The working-class teenager from Spring Branch had been replaced by a polished young man who could navigate Houston's high society with apparent ease. But beneath the expensive clothes and practiced charm, something was breaking. The weight of Katherine's expectations, the constant surveillance, the loss of autonomy, it was a pressure that would eventually find release, one way or another. In quiet moments alone, often late at night in his too-perfect apartment, Jake would look at his reflection in the windows and barely recognize himself. The designer clothes felt like a costume, the practiced smile a mask. The future that had seemed so bright at the beginning of summer now felt like a carefully constructed prison. What Jake didn't yet realize was that Katherine had played this game before. Her previous relationships followed a similar pattern. Young men molded to her specifications, controlled through a combination of financial dependency and emotional manipulation. But Jake was different in one crucial aspect. He was younger, more naive, and therefore more dangerous to Katherine's carefully constructed world. His very innocence made him unpredictable, and in Katherine's world, unpredictability was something to be eliminated at any cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the careful facade of their arrangement. All it would take was a catalyst, a moment of rebellion, a taste of genuine connection, a glimpse of a different future, and the delicate balance Katherine had engineered would begin to crumble, with fatal consequences for them both. Sophie Williams entered Jake's carefully controlled world on a sweltering August afternoon at River Oaks Country Club. She was arranging chairs for an upcoming student art exhibition in the club's East Gallery when Jake, making his usual rounds, offered to help. Their first conversation, watched by Katherine from her usual poolside perch, seemed innocent enough. Two young people discussing the logistics of furniture arrangement. What Katherine couldn't hear was the immediate connection that sparked between them. Sophie, a freshman at the University of Houston studying art history, shared Jake's working-class background. Her scholarship to college had come through merit rather than manipulation, and her part-time job at the club's art gallery represented genuine career aspirations rather than a carefully crafted facade. "You don't seem like the usual River Oaks crowd," Sophie observed during their first conversation, her direct gaze cutting through the polished veneer Katherine had crafted for him. For the first time in months, Jake felt truly seen. Their conversations became a daily ritual, stolen moments between his duties and her gallery work. Sophie's genuine interest in art and her passionate discussions about her studies awakened something in Jake that Katherine's calculated mentorship had never touched, a sense of authentic connection. Sophie quickly noticed the designer watch on Jake's wrist, the carefully tailored uniform that set him apart from other staff members. The Montgomery Foundation scholarship recipient, she said one day, not quite a question. "People talk about it." Her tone carried no judgment, but her eyes reflected concern. Jake found himself sharing more than he intended, carefully edited versions of his arrangement with Katherine, his dreams of business school, the growing sense of suffocation beneath the weight of expectations and control. Sophie listened without the calculating interest he'd grown accustomed to from Katherine's social circle. Their friendship deepened through shared experiences and understanding. Sophie's father worked construction, like Jake's. Her mother was a school secretary. They knew the same neighborhoods, understood the same struggles, shared the same dreams of bridging the vast gulf between their origins and their aspirations. Katherine observed their growing closeness with mounting concern. She began appearing at unexpected moments, interrupting their conversations with manufactured tasks for Jake. Her casual touches became more possessive, her public displays of ownership more obvious. The surveillance intensified. Katherine installed new security cameras around the club's art gallery, ostensibly for protecting the artwork. She began requiring Jake to check in hourly, his phone buzzing with her messages throughout the day. Her questions about his activities became more pointed, more suspicious. "You seem distracted lately," Katherine remarked during one of their private dinners, her voice carrying that dangerous softness Jake had learned to fear. "I hope nothing is interfering with your focus on your future." The threat was clear beneath the concern. Jake's resistance grew with each restriction. Small acts of defiance emerged, delayed responses to Katherine's messages, excuses to spend more time near the gallery, quiet conversations with Sophie that felt like breathing fresh air after months of suffocation. Sophie became both his confidant and his conscience. What she's doing isn't normal, she told him during one of their hurried conversations. It's not mentorship, Jake. It's control. Katherine's discovery of their deepening connection came through her extensive surveillance network. A security camera captured Jake and Sophie sharing lunch behind the gallery, their easy laughter and natural intimacy in stark contrast to his carefully choreographed interactions with Katherine. The response was immediate and multifaceted. First came the financial pressure. Katherine froze Jake's credit cards without warning, a reminder of his dependence. Then came the emotional manipulation, tearful accusations of betrayal, reminders of all she had sacrificed for his future. I can end your university enrollment with a single phone call, she reminded him during a particularly vicious confrontation. Everything you have, everything you hope to become, exists because of me. But Katherine's greatest weapon was information. Through her network of private investigators, she had uncovered details about Sophie's scholarship, her family's financial struggles, her younger brother's medical bills. The threats became explicit. If Jake continued his friendship with Sophie, Katherine would ensure the girl's life became very difficult indeed. Jake found himself trapped in an impossible position. His growing feelings for Sophie represented everything genuine and hopeful in his life, while Katherine's escalating control threatened to destroy not only his future but Sophie's as well. Sophie refused to be intimidated. She only has the power you give her, she told Jake during one of their increasingly furtive meetings. What she's doing, the surveillance, the threats, the control, it's abuse, Jake. Plain and simple. Katherine's behavior became more erratic as her control began to slip. She appeared at Jake's apartment at odd hours, her composed facade cracking to reveal the desperate woman beneath. The gifts became more extravagant, the demands more extreme, the threats more explicit. She began showing up at his university registration appointments, inserting herself into every aspect of his academic planning. Her presence on campus felt like an invasion, her expensive perfume and designer clothes marking her as an intruder in the one space Jake had hoped to claim for himself. The psychological toll became visible. Jake's once easy smile grew strained, his shoulders tense with constant vigilance. Even the staff at River Oaks noticed the change, the way he flinched at unexpected sounds, the haunted look that came into his eyes whenever Katherine appeared. Sophie watched with growing alarm as Jake withdrew into himself, Katherine's psychological warfare taking its toll. During their brief conversations, now held in hidden corners of the club grounds, she saw the light in his eyes dimming, replaced by a desperate resignation. You need to get out, Sophie urged him, her hand gripping his arm with urgent concern. Whatever she's holding over you, whatever she's threatening, we can fight it. There are people who can help. But Jake felt trapped in a web of Katherine's making. The apartment lease, the university tuition, the carefully documented scholarship, everything in his life was tied to Katherine's influence. The thought of losing it all, of returning to his family with nothing but failure and shame, paralyzed him. Katherine's final move came in the form of an ultimatum. During a late-night confrontation in his apartment, she laid out her terms. Jake would cut all contact with Sophie, transfer to a different university out of state, and recommit himself completely to their arrangement. In return, she would continue funding his education and maintain her silence about the true nature of their relationship. Think carefully about your decision, Katherine told him, her manicured nails drumming against the granite countertop. You're not just choosing for yourself. Sophie's future is in your hands too. The breaking point approached with the inevitability of a gathering storm. Jake felt himself being torn apart, between genuine connection and gilded captivity, between Sophie's honest affection and Katherine's possessive obsession, between the person he was becoming and the carefully crafted image Katherine had created. In the final days of August, as Houston's summer heat reached its brutal peak, the pressure became unbearable. Jake's world had narrowed to an impossible choice: surrender completely to Katherine's control or risk losing everything, including Sophie's future. What Jake couldn't know was that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would end in violence. Katherine Montgomery's carefully constructed world was about to shatter, and the breaking point would come not with a whimper, but with a bang that would echo through the halls of River Oaks for years to come. August 30th, 2022, began like any other late summer day in Houston. The morning security footage from Katherine Montgomery's mansion showed the usual parade of service vehicles. Landscapers at 7 a.m., pool maintenance at 9, housekeeping at 10. Katherine herself appeared in frame at 11:23 a.m., leaving for her regular salon appointment in her white Mercedes G-Wagon. The day's final hours would later be reconstructed through a combination of security footage, witness statements, and physical evidence. At 9:47 p.m., Jake Turner's black Audi, a recent gift from Katherine, passed through the gates of the River Oaks estate. He had received a series of increasingly urgent messages from Katherine throughout the evening, demanding his presence to discuss their arrangement. The exterior cameras captured Jake's hesitation at the front door, 3 attempts to ring the bell before finally using the key Katherine had given him. Inside, the foyer cameras showed Katherine waiting, a crystal tumbler of scotch in her hand. She was wearing a silk Valentino dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, as if this were any other evening in River Oaks. Their initial conversation, picked up by the security system's audio, started quietly enough. Katherine's voice was controlled, almost gentle, as she confronted Jake about his afternoon meeting with Sophie at a coffee shop off campus. "I thought we had an understanding," she said, her words slightly slurred. "After everything I've done for you." Jake's response was tired, resigned. "I can't do this anymore, Katherine. The control, the surveillance, the threats, it has to stop." The security footage showed Katherine's transformation, the mask of sophisticated benefactor cracking to reveal something darker beneath. She moved closer to Jake, her movements becoming predatory. "You ungrateful little bastard," she hissed. "You're nothing without me. Do you understand? Nothing." The confrontation escalated rapidly. Katherine revealed her final piece of leverage. She had documentation of their entire relationship, carefully curated evidence that could destroy not only Jake's future but potentially lead to criminal charges. "One phone call," she threatened, "and your life is over." At 10:23 p.m., the security footage showed Jake turning to leave. Katherine's reaction was explosive. She grabbed his arm, her manicured nails drawing blood. The crystal tumbler shattered against the wall near his head, spraying expensive scotch and glass across the imported wallpaper. The physical struggle that followed was captured in fragments by various security cameras. They crashed through the formal living room, knocking over a Tiffany lamp worth more than Jake's father made in a year. Katherine, fueled by rage and alcohol, displayed surprising strength. A vintage vase shattered, water and roses spreading across the marble floor. At 10:27 p.m., Katherine grabbed an ornate letter opener from her desk, a family heirloom that would later be identified as the source of the deep gash in Jake's forearm. The security footage showed Jake desperately trying to defend himself while also attempting to restrain Katherine without causing harm. The fatal moment came at 10:29 p.m. Katherine, having lost the letter opener in the struggle, lunged at Jake again. He instinctively pushed her away. The cameras captured her stumble, her designer heel catching on the Persian rug. The back of her head struck the corner of the marble fireplace with decisive force. For a moment, everything stopped. The security footage showed Jake frozen in place, watching in horror as blood began to pool around Katherine's head. He checked for a pulse, his hands shaking. At 10:34 p.m., he stumbled out of the house, leaving bloody fingerprints on the front door that would later become key evidence. The immediate aftermath unfolded with the inexorable momentum of a Greek tragedy. Maria Delgado, arriving for work at 7:15 a.m. the next morning, discovered the scene. Her screams brought neighbors running. By 7:23 a.m., 3 separate calls to 911 had been logged. Houston PD's response was immediate and overwhelming. Detective Maria Ramirez arrived at 8:07 a.m. to find the mansion already cordoned off. Crime scene technicians moved methodically through the house, documenting everything. Blood spatter analysis would later confirm Jake's version of events. The fatal impact was consistent with a fall rather than an intentional attack. The media descended like vultures. By 9 a.m., news helicopters circled overhead. Local stations broke into regular programming with breaking news. Prominent Houston socialite found dead. Reporters clustered at the gates, their cameras focused on the steady stream of law enforcement vehicles. Detective Ramirez faced her first major challenge when Katherine's adult children arrived at 10:15 a.m. Their reaction to their stepmother's death was complicated, shock mixed with what some officers noted as poorly concealed relief. They provided the first hints of Katherine's true nature, speaking of her controlling behavior and manipulation. The investigation moved with practiced efficiency. Forensics teams documented and collected evidence, blood samples, broken glass, security footage. The letter opener was found beneath an overturned chair, Jake's blood confirmed on its blade. Katherine's phone revealed the barrage of messages she had sent Jake throughout the previous day, each one more demanding than the last. By noon, Jake Turner's name and photo were being broadcast across every news channel in Texas. His parents' modest apartment in Spring Branch was surrounded by reporters. His mother, still in her hospital scrubs, faced the cameras with quiet dignity, pleading for her son to turn himself in. The manhunt began in earnest as evidence of premeditation began to crumble. Security footage from the University of Houston showed Jake's earlier meeting with Sophie, not a clandestine romantic rendezvous, but a desperate conversation about escaping Katherine's control. Sophie, immediately located and questioned, provided investigators with crucial context about the nature of Jake and Katherine's relationship. As the summer sun set on August 31, 2022, Houston was gripped by a story that seemed too sensational to be real. A wealthy socialite dead in her mansion, a young man on the run, and whispers of a relationship that blurred the lines between mentorship and abuse. News anchors breathlessly reported each development, while social commentators began to dissect the class dynamics and power implications of the case. Detective Ramirez, reviewing the security footage for the third time that evening, noted something telling in Jake's final moments on camera. As he fled the house, he didn't appear to be running from a crime, but from the gilded cage that had nearly consumed him. The next 72 hours would determine not only Jake's fate but also how history would remember the night Katherine Montgomery's carefully constructed world came crashing down. The search for Jake Turner was already expanding beyond Houston's city limits. Border Patrol was alerted, airports and bus stations were under surveillance. But as Detective Ramirez would later note in her case file, they were looking for someone who had nowhere to go. Jake Turner was running not toward something, but away from the shattered remains of a life that had seemed too good to be true. The truth about Katherine Montgomery emerged slowly, pieced together by Detective Maria Ramirez's meticulous investigation. The breakthrough came 3 days after Katherine's death, when forensics teams discovered a hidden safe in her home office. Inside, they found what amounted to a blueprint of manipulation, detailed dossiers on previous young men, financial records of payments disguised as scholarships, and surveillance reports spanning years. Katherine's private laptop revealed an obsession with control that bordered on pathological. Folders contained thousands of photos of Jake, tracked expenses, and detailed schedules of his daily activities. More disturbing were the files documenting her previous relationships, young men who had been controlled, manipulated, and ultimately discarded when they became too independent or resistant to her influence. Jake Turner was found on September 3, not through police work, but because he walked into the Houston Police Department's Central Station himself. He was accompanied by Sophie Williams and his parents, his father's work-worn hand gripping his shoulder in silent support. His mother's quiet dignity in the face of media cameras would later become one of the case's defining images. Detective Ramirez conducted the initial interview personally. For 6 hours, Jake detailed the progression of his relationship with Katherine, from the seemingly innocent offer of mentorship to the gradual erosion of his autonomy. The interview tape would later become crucial evidence, his quiet voice steady as he described the psychological manipulation and escalating control. The investigation expanded beyond Jake's story. Former household staff came forward with accounts of Katherine's obsessive behavior. Her previous young companions were located and interviewed, each story following a similar pattern of financial control and emotional manipulation. A former driver described watching Katherine systematically isolate and control young men, using her wealth and influence to create dependency. Katherine's children proved surprisingly cooperative with the investigation. Her stepdaughter provided emails documenting Katherine's history of manipulative behavior, including attempts to control her access to her father during his final illness. Her stepson revealed that Katherine had threatened to contest their inheritances if they interfered with her personal matters. The district attorney's office initially charged Jake with second-degree murder, but as evidence of Katherine's pattern of predatory behavior mounted, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. The decision sparked heated debate in legal circles about self-defense in cases of psychological abuse and financial control. The trial began on November 1, 2022, in the Harris County Criminal Court. The prosecution, led by veteran attorney James Martinez, painted a picture of a privileged young man who had turned on his benefactor. But their narrative struggled against the mountain of evidence revealing Katherine's true nature. The defense team, headed by Sarah Chen, built their case around the concept of psychological imprisonment. They brought in experts to testify about patterns of abuse and control, demonstrating how Katherine had systematically stripped away Jake's autonomy. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a forensic psychologist, testified about the parallel between Katherine's methods and those of domestic abusers. The golden handcuffs she created were as restrictive as any physical restraints, she explained to the jury. Mr. Turner was essentially a prisoner in a cage built of financial dependency and psychological manipulation. The surveillance evidence proved particularly damning. Security experts demonstrated how Katherine had monitored every aspect of Jake's life, from his movements to his spending to his communications. The jury was shown footage of Katherine appearing at locations Jake visited, demonstrating her constant surveillance and control. Sophie Williams' testimony provided a turning point in the trial. Her account of watching Jake's gradual psychological deterioration, combined with her documentation of Katherine's escalating threats, helped the jury understand the level of control Katherine had exercised. Her description of their final conversation, hours before the fatal confrontation, revealed Jake's growing desperation to escape. The prosecution's case suffered another blow when Katherine's personal physician testified about prescriptions for anxiety and mood stabilizers, suggesting a pattern of escalating mental instability in the months before her death. Hospital records indicated several private consultations where Katherine had expressed paranoid fears about losing control of her young companion. Financial forensics revealed the extent of Katherine's manipulation. The Montgomery Foundation's scholarship program was exposed as a front for controlling young men, with Katherine using charitable donations to create financial dependency. Bank records showed how she had systematically gained control over every aspect of Jake's financial life. The defense team's masterstroke was presenting the contents of Katherine's hidden safe. The documented pattern of predatory behavior spanning years transformed the narrative from a single incident of violence to the inevitable conclusion of a systematic campaign of abuse. After 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict on December 15, 2022. Jake Turner was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but with a strong recommendation for leniency based on the circumstances. The judge, taking into account the extraordinary nature of the case, sentenced him to 5 years probation and mandatory counseling. The verdict sparked intense debate in legal circles about the recognition of psychological abuse and financial control as mitigating factors in criminal cases. Several law review articles would later cite the case as a landmark in the evolution of self-defense doctrine. The aftermath of the trial brought significant changes to Houston's philanthropic community. The Montgomery Foundation underwent a complete restructuring, with Katherine's stepchildren establishing new oversight measures for all scholarship programs. Several other prominent charitable organizations revised their mentorship guidelines, implementing safeguards against potential abuse of power. Jake Turner's story became a cautionary tale about the dark side of wealth and influence. He enrolled in community college the following spring, paying his own tuition through part-time work. Sophie Williams remained by his side, their relationship strengthened by the ordeal they had weathered together. The River Oaks mansion was sold, its contents auctioned off to settle various legal claims. The marble fireplace that had played such a crucial role in Katherine's death was removed during renovations, as the new owners sought to erase the physical reminders of that fatal night. Detective Ramirez kept the case file on her desk for months afterward, occasionally reviewing the evidence and considering the broader implications. The case had exposed how wealth and power could create invisible prisons, how control could be exercised through seemingly benevolent actions, and how justice sometimes required looking beyond the surface of privilege and respectability. The truth about Katherine Montgomery emerged slowly, pieced together by Detective Maria Ramirez's meticulous investigation. The breakthrough came 3 days after Katherine's death, when forensics teams discovered a hidden safe in her home office. Inside, they found what amounted to a blueprint of manipulation, detailed dossiers on previous young men, financial records of payments disguised as scholarships, and surveillance reports spanning years. Katherine's private laptop revealed an obsession with control that bordered on pathological. Folders contained thousands of photos of Jake, tracked expenses, and detailed schedules of his daily activities. More disturbing were the files documenting her previous relationships, young men who had been controlled, manipulated, and ultimately discarded when they became too independent or resistant to her influence. Jake Turner was found on September 3rd, not through police work, but because he walked into the Houston Police Department's Central Station himself. He was accompanied by Sophie Williams and his parents, his father's work-worn hand gripping his shoulder in silent support. His mother's quiet dignity in the face of media cameras would later become one of the case's defining images. Detective Ramirez conducted the initial interview personally. For 6 hours, Jake detailed the progression of his relationship with Katherine, from the seemingly innocent offer of mentorship to the gradual erosion of his autonomy. The interview tape would later become crucial evidence, his quiet voice steady as he described the psychological manipulation and escalating control. The investigation expanded beyond Jake's story. Former household staff came forward with accounts of Katherine's obsessive behavior. Her previous young companions were located and interviewed, each story following a similar pattern of financial control and emotional manipulation. A former driver described watching Katherine systematically isolate and control young men, using her wealth and influence to create dependency. Katherine's children proved surprisingly cooperative with the investigation. Her stepdaughter provided emails documenting Katherine's history of manipulative behavior, including attempts to control her access to her father during his final illness. Her stepson revealed that Katherine had threatened to contest their inheritances if they interfered with her personal matters. The district attorney's office initially charged Jake with second-degree murder, but as evidence of Katherine's pattern of predatory behavior mounted, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. The decision sparked heated debate in legal circles about self-defense in cases of psychological abuse and financial control. The trial began on November 1, 2022, in the Harris County Criminal Court. The prosecution, led by veteran attorney James Martinez, painted a picture of a privileged young man who had turned on his benefactor. But their narrative struggled against the mountain of evidence revealing Katherine's true nature. The defense team, headed by Sarah Chen, built their case around the concept of psychological imprisonment. They brought in experts to testify about patterns of abuse and control, demonstrating how Katherine had systematically stripped away Jake's autonomy. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a forensic psychologist, testified about the parallel between Katherine's methods and those of domestic abusers. The golden handcuffs she created were as restrictive as any physical restraints, she explained to the jury. Mr. Turner was essentially a prisoner in a cage built of financial dependency and psychological manipulation. The surveillance evidence proved particularly damning. Security experts demonstrated how Katherine had monitored every aspect of Jake's life, from his movements to his spending to his communications. The jury was shown footage of Katherine appearing at locations Jake visited, demonstrating her constant surveillance and control. Sophie Williams' testimony provided a turning point in the trial. Her account of watching Jake's gradual psychological deterioration, combined with her documentation of Katherine's escalating threats, helped the jury understand the level of control Katherine had exercised. Her description of their final conversation, hours before the fatal confrontation, revealed Jake's growing desperation to escape. The prosecution's case suffered another blow when Katherine's personal physician testified about prescriptions for anxiety and mood stabilizers, suggesting a pattern of escalating mental instability in the months before her death. Hospital records indicated several private consultations where Katherine had expressed paranoid fears about losing control of her young companion. Financial forensics revealed the extent of Katherine's manipulation. The Montgomery Foundation's scholarship program was exposed as a front for controlling young men, with Katherine using charitable donations to create financial dependency. Bank records showed how she had systematically gained control over every aspect of Jake's financial life. The defense team's masterstroke was presenting the contents of Katherine's hidden safe. The documented pattern of predatory behavior spanning years transformed the narrative from a single incident of violence to the inevitable conclusion of a systematic campaign of abuse. After 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict on December 15, 2022. Jake Turner was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but with a strong recommendation for leniency based on the circumstances. The judge, taking into account the extraordinary nature of the case, sentenced him to 5 years probation and mandatory counseling. The verdict sparked intense debate in legal circles about the recognition of psychological abuse and financial control as mitigating factors in criminal cases. Several law review articles would later cite the case as a landmark in the evolution of self-defense doctrine. The aftermath of the trial brought significant changes to Houston's philanthropic community. The Montgomery Foundation underwent a complete restructuring, with Katherine's stepchildren establishing new oversight measures for all scholarship programs. Several other prominent charitable organizations revised their mentorship guidelines, implementing safeguards against potential abuse of power. Jake Turner's story became a cautionary tale about the dark side of wealth and influence. He enrolled in community college the following spring, paying his own tuition through part-time work. Sophie Williams remained by his side, their relationship strengthened by the ordeal they had weathered together. The River Oaks mansion was sold, its contents auctioned off to settle various legal claims. The marble fireplace that had played such a crucial role in Katherine's death was removed during renovations, as the new owners sought to erase the physical reminders of that fatal night. Detective Ramirez kept the case file on her desk for months afterward, occasionally reviewing the evidence and considering the broader implications. The case had exposed how wealth and power could create invisible prisons, how control could be exercised through seemingly benevolent actions, and how justice sometimes required looking beyond the surface of privilege and respectability.